The latest on Martin Fehervary next on this edition of Locked On Caps.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the Hershey Bears and their push for the Calder Cup. And winning the Calder Cup is the ultimate prize for an AHL player, but for the Bears, it is an excellent opportunity to showcase your talent in front of the Capitals brass to say, hey, take a look at me. Maybe you want to give me a look in camp, and maybe I belong on the Caps next year. We'll talk about that in the show. Then a little bit later, we will talk about Spencer Carbery's first conversation with Alex Ovechkin and how that went. But just to get it going here, talking about Martin Fehervary, the future of the Capitals blue line, the present of the Capitals blue line, but a young and up-and-coming player. He's been on the team for some time. It's not like he's new to this team, but still a young man and fits the narrative of getting younger and faster. He brings a physical game, and he can kind of get under the skin of certain players, like with Sidney Crosby, that kind of thing. And I ultimately like what he brings to this team. For the longest time, he led the team in hits. So he brings a lot of the things that are important to a defenseman for the Caps. And ultimately, where does he stand as he is a restricted free agent? But I think if you take even a look at the Alex Alexiev thing, he was a restricted free agent. I think the Capitals would be best served to take care of this sooner than later, so it doesn't get drawn out to the end and that kind of thing. And I ultimately think, for me, if I'm the GM right now, I'm giving him a new deal. I just like what he brings to this team. And I think if you're a fan, you would see the same thing. But just taking a look at his contract here, that is the interesting part. Can they come to terms with it? The Caps are shifting their focus to their roster now that they have their head coach. And one item on their lengthy offseason to-do list is to negotiate a new deal with Marty Fehervary. Fehervary is a restricted free agent, and GM Brian MacLellan said he expects contract talks to pick up for both sides in the coming weeks. And we know coming up here is free agency. He is a restricted free agent, so the Caps still have his rights. It's not like they are going to lose him, but again, it would be best if they took care of things sooner than later. Discussions will pick up shortly, MacLellan said. And, I don't know, are the Caps seeing what all their options are? Are they waiting a couple weeks to see what happens on the free agent market? Everything I see is that the free agent market is pretty slim this year, that if you're going to upgrade your team, you're most likely going to have to do it by making a big trade. And, I would hope that there's no plans of trading Martin Fehervary off this team unless you're getting a noticeable upgrade, something of that nature. But that's mostly conspiratorial. I don't really think that is going to happen. But again, I think they would be best served to take care of it sooner than later. The Slovak now has 2 years of NHL experience under his belt and has solidified his role on the Caps' top four. He has played key shutdown roles and has impressed with his physicality, like I spoke of, his skating, while also adding flares of offensive ability. I think that we have just seen the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Marty Fehervary. I think that we are seeing his game evolve, and he is one of the first Capitals players in quite some time that has gone through the ranks from Hershey up to the big team and has maintained a role on the big team. That's quite an accomplishment for him if you think about it, especially considering it was Peter Laviolette and Barry Trotz who are both criticized for not wanting to utilize young players. For Martin Fehervary to be on this team and to maintain a role, to have a sweater night in and night out speaks volumes of him. If you think about all the other Caps players that have kind of bounced up and down, I guess you could put Alexi Protas in that mix as well. But before Protas and before Marty Fehervary, I mean, it was pretty much like Tom Wilson before that. I know there's been players that have moved on to other organizations, but you get the gist of what I'm saying here is rarely in recent memory have, Caps players risen up through the ranks and kept a role on the team. We really like what he's done. He's a big part of our organization going forward. Max said of Fehervary in March, I think we got two young guns, Rasmus, Sandin, and him, and that hopefully we can build around him going forward. We're going to have two young top four defensemen. That'll be a big part of our team for a lot of years to come. And that's a good thing to have. You have that youth, and you also can infuse that with the experience of top Caps blue liner John Carlson. I think that if you put this in a pot, mix it together, and put it in the oven for 350 degrees for 20 minutes, it is going to be a recipe for success. And it smells pretty good cooking in the oven, I got to say, all things considered. So I do think that this team, the blue line in particular, Marty Fehervary, we're going in the right direction. We're taking baby steps on getting younger and faster. It's not like you're going into a house and you're like, this house is damaged. Let's tear it all down to the studs and start all over again. We're walking around the house with a clipboard and a pencil, and we're saying this needs to get changed. And then we're making those changes baby step at a time. And I think that prudent decisions like that will serve the Caps the best. I know that there's these promises made to Ovi and that kind of thing, but just in this particular segment here, talking about Martin Fehervary and another young defenseman in Rasmus Sandin, these are the baby steps of getting this team younger and faster and getting in the right direction, but not, again, just, alienating all the veterans on the team. You still need those key pieces like John Carlson on the team as well. So, again, that is what excites me about having Marty Fehervary on this team. Through 67 games this season, Fehervary had a whopping 217 hits and 128 blocks while averaging 20 minutes per game, the most among Washington's left-handed blue liners. His plus minus took a hit at -11, but he dealt with two major injuries and was moved around quite a bit with John Carlson out long term and more ailments plaguing the team. This story in the hockey news. So again, it's exciting to see, the future of what will be on the blue line. And I think that Rasmus Sandin and Martin Fehervary fit in that. A little bit hard, he said, but I think obviously I felt way more comfortable and way more confident than last year. Fehervary said, I'm always trying to focus on my game, trying to be as best as I can, and trying to perform really good all the time. I always like to be that type of player, really being hard to play against, and I think he nails it to a T. So I think that all we really expect from Martin Fehervary is to continue doing what he does best, his physical brand of hockey with a flair for offense. I think that is going to be the things that are really going to help him excel going forward. I don't really think there's anything that really needs to be changed in Martin Fehervary's game. Just keep doing what you're doing, and I think that contract will come sooner than later. All right, coming up here, we will talk about Spencer Carbery's first conversation with Alex Ovechkin, and what did they talk about that? We'll talk about that more when Locked On Capitals continues. So one of the frustrating things is trying to find tickets to those events in your area, and you go to these different apps and you can't find tickets. That is why you need Game Time. They make finding tickets for those events easy. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over tickets and start getting hyped. over the fun that you will have. And it's a really easy app to use. I would recommend it. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure and subscribe or follow Locked On Capitals wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube, as I have a lot of great guests lined up for you this summer. I also have you guys covered when it comes to free agency and the draft. So follow or subscribe to Locked On Capitals today. All right, in this next segment here, we are going to talk about Spencer Carbery's first conversations with Alex Ovechkin and how did that go? One of the things about Ovi, he is the captain of this team. And one of the things that Max said is that they kept Alex Ovechkin up to date with the head coach search. They didn't, talk to him every minute saying, what do you think of this guy? What do you think of that guy? Alex Ovechkin's just like, before you pull the trigger, I want to know who the head coach is. And I'm paraphrasing it here, but that is the gist of what was said. And I think that ultimately there probably would be certain coaches out there that potentially he wouldn't want to be, have it to be his coach. Babcock comes to mind as one of those potential players. That's just my, thoughts on maybe one coach that he wouldn't want to have coach over him. But you know what I'm saying? You want a head coach that is going to help you be a better player. You want a head coach that is going to help this team, make strides for a Stanley Cup and help him in his goal of passing Wayne Gretzky for the all-time in goals. So I do think that they bounced, his name off Ovi, and ultimately he approved of it. And what were the first conversations like between Spencer Carbery and Alex Ovechkin? Spencer Carbery was announced as the new head coach of the Caps last week, and since then, he's done the usual DC rounds. On Monday, Carbery did a radio hit with Elliot in the morning and talked more about his new role, specifically addressing his first conversation with Caps captain Alex Ovechkin since becoming Ovi's 8th bench boss in DC. Is it just me, or is that a lot of head coaches to play under? But that is the nature of the beast. It was great. Carbery said, I know him, obviously. I have a relationship going back a few years from being around camps. It was a good conversation. He's back home. He sort of laid out his plans for the offseason. And what sticks out right away is that he's a competitor and he wants to win. And we know that that is who Ovi is. I mean, he is a guy that is fastidious with his workout. You see all those videos in previous off seasons where he's tying weights around his waist and running up hills. And the one thing about Alex Ovechkin is that he is going to come into camp in the fall in premium condition. We don't need to worry about him. He is, well, I can't say it because he's going to trademark it here sooner than later, but he is named after a certain DC blog, RMNB. And that is why he got that name, is because he is that tough player out there that gives his level best, and he goes above and beyond. Ovi and his family returned to Russia in late April after the Caps ran out the regular season schedule and did not qualify for the 2023 postseason. That failure helped lead to Peter Laviolette and the Caps parting ways, paving the way for Carbery coming on as a head coach. And I do think, just, from what I've seen and kind of knowing their personality, I've seen a lot of interviews with Alex Ovechkin. I've seen some interviews with Spencer Carbery. I think that their personalities will gel perfectly. And I think that will help. If you have a good relationship with a guy like Alex Ovechkin, the captain of the team, I do think that will go a long way. The grade 8 said in May that he plans for rest for right now and then to start ramp up training in July. As usual, when we talk, everything is team-centric stuff, Carbery continued. You'd think a lot of conversation leads to goals and achieving something really, really special. And it's the opposite. It leads towards team stuff and how we're going to win. That's a pretty special quality about Alex and what makes him such a great leader and such a great individual athlete. And this should not come as any surprise, as we saw in the interviews before the season started, that he kind of pushed away all the talk of him chasing down Wayne Gretzky in the back of his mind. I think that this is just something that came along with him being a really great player. I don't think when he set out, he's like, my goal is to take on Wayne Gretzky. I just think that, he continued to progress and be a really great hockey player. And that is just a benefit of him being a really great goal scorer, so I think that that is why he's always been so driven with team goals and not just individual goals. Don't get me wrong. I think he's going to be very happy when he passes Wayne Gretzky. But I think one of his biggest goals, he said as much, is getting at least one more cup with this team. I think he'd like multiple cups, but for him, I think he would be happy with at least one more cup before he hangs up the skates. Carbery joins the team as Ovi chases Wayne Gretzky's all-time goal mark. Ovi will start the season just 72 goals away from matching Gretzky's career total of 894. This piece in RMNB. So, it seems like the initial conversations have gone well. Carberry talks about it here. It's a huge responsibility for me as head coach. I've watched and seen his greatness up close and indirectly. It's my job as a head coach to put him in situations where he can be successful. And that's what my challenge is. And I don't take that lightly at all. That'll work into how we play as a group. One of my focuses is how we put him in situations to succeed. And that is exactly what the Caps were looking for. I didn't really expect to hear anything less, to be honest with you, but I'm glad that he, is giving Ovi, his due and just kind of laying it out that, we're going to help Alex Ovechkin in his goals. In that regard, Elliott asked Carberry about his plans to help elevate the Caps power play to its former glory. Ovi's 14 power play goals during the 22-23 campaign was the lowest single season total since the 2011-2012 season, where he scored 13 times a man to the good. So I do think, you take a look at the power play up in Toronto, he was ranked number 2. He was the one that was in charge of the power play, and he had Toronto at number 2. That's quite an impressive stat considering, where the power play was for the Maple Leafs before that. So, that is a real, accolade. That is a real feather in his hat. That is an accomplishment to have in his back pocket. So, I think that he would be the perfect guy. And he said as much as that he wasn't going to divulge what Toronto did, but he said that he's kind of been a sponge, from location to location to location that he's been, and kind of almost use it as like a cheat code, and as an assistant, he could kind of sit back and saw what worked and what didn't. And he's learned at every step. And, he's, did different things and said, hey, that worked. I saw that work and that didn't work. So I'm not going to do that again. So I think that Spencer Carberry has amassed all these great ideas. But one of the biggest things here is recognizing greatness, that Alex Ovechkin is a key piece, the biggest key piece, in my opinion, on this Capitals team. Make Ovi happy. I think everything else will fall into place. If he's playing and he's angry, well, sometimes we've seen good play out of Ovi when he's angry too. But I think at the end of the day, what we want is Ovi happy and productive and helping this team really knock it out of the park so this Caps team can make a push for another Stanley Cup. I know it's an ambitious goal considering that they didn't make it to the postseason, but I do think with the new head coach and the new systems and potentially whatever other players are acquired in the offseason, I think this team is poised for really great things. All right, coming up here, we will talk about the Bears push in the Calder Cup. Of course, their above all end all is to win a Calder Cup in the AHL there. But what is even more important is using this opportunity to showcase your talents to the brass for the Washington Capitals, right? So we'll talk about that when Locked On Capitals continues. Our next sponsor here is Bird Dogs. And let me tell you, I love my Bird Dogs that got sent to me. Why? Because they are comfortable. No more. I just took my old cargo shorts that I had from years ago. I should have done it a long time ago, and I threw them in the garbage. Why? Because Bird Dogs are comfortable and they make you look great. Bird Dog stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. They fit way better than just just regular shorts that are made of stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dogs fix this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Bird Dogs uses anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. Go to birddogs.com/lockedonnhl and enter promo code LOCKEDONNHL for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnhl for a free Yeti style tumbler. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I, for one, am excited that the Hershey Bears are headed to the Calder Cup final. They didn't just make it to the first round, they are playing in the final. It's a big deal. And, it's a big deal for the players. There are a lot of players that played for the Caps last season. You take a look at Connor McMichael and Alexi Protas that helped play for Hershey in the playoffs here and really have propelled them to great things. Of course, the biggest goal is to win another Calder Cup. The Hershey Bears are no stranger to it, but even more importantly than that is a player like Connor McMichael, Alexi Protas, to prove to the brass of the Capitals that, hey, take a look at me, look at what I'm doing. Connor McMichael in particular, he had some knocks against him last season. He went down to Hershey and said, I'm putting the Capitals in the rearview mirror. I am going to be laser focused, tunnel vision on playing the best I can possibly play in Hershey, and great things have followed. And that is ultimately what we're looking for from the players that are playing down in Hershey. The Hershey Bears will begin their quest for an AHL championship in Coachella Valley, California on Thursday tonight as you listen to this, when they face the Firebirds in game 1 of the Calder Cup finals. It's a big deal for legendary Bears, who are in the finals for the 24th time in franchise history and are seeking to extend their league record for titles to 12. So they're no stranger to excellence in the Chocolate City. It's so valuable. It really is to go through this experience. First-year Hershey coach Todd Nelson said this week, I believe winning is a form of development, because if they can't win in this environment in the Calder Cup playoffs, then they won't be able to do it in the Stanley Cup playoffs, added Nelson, who coached Grand Rapids to an AHL championship in 2017. It's a training ground. They understand how hard it is now. And I am most impressed with the players, but also very impressed in Todd Nelson. Could he also be showcasing his talents for maybe a potential assistant coach job for the Capitals? Hey, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it, but, it's a good showcase for the coach and for the team. Although the Bears field a veteran-laden roster, the Caps youngsters have played a big role throughout a grueling run that began on April 28th and has featured series wins over Charlotte, Hartford, and Rochester. Decisive victories, and they're just knocking them out. I have no reason to believe that this Bears team is not capable of winning a Calder Cup, and they're doing it with some really young, great players. The experience is huge, Helmer said from his second level at Giant Center as Nelson put the Bears through their paces on the ice below. In 2008, 2009 through 10, Helmer captained Hershey's back-to-back championships teams, so he saw firsthand how the pressure-packed games against the AHL's best teams helped prepare John Carlson, Jay Beagle, Carl Alzner, Michael Neuwirth, Matthew Perot, and others for the NHL. That's quite a list, and it kind of some of those names I haven't even thought of for quite some time. Playing in these games, these are important. It's huge for the young guys to be in these situations, Helmer said. How did they handle their emotions before a game, during a game, the big crowds, the pressure? And I agree with the assessment there that if they can't handle the pressures of playing in the AHL, how will they ever be able to do it on the big stage in the NHL, where there's a lot more at stake? But, again, it just the kind of what the whole subject is of this segment is a showcase for some players that are kind of on the cusp. The 4 prospects who likely have the best chance of securing a spot in DC next season are Alexi Protas, of course, Connor McMichael. I really want to see that. Beck Mallenstein as well, and Lucas Johansson have not only been productive in these playoffs, they've produced a defining moment. And Lucas Johansson is one of the interesting ones. I'm going to say the most interesting player of those players listed, and perhaps the one that is most likely not to crack the big team. Listen, we've heard Lucas Johansson's name for years on this team, that he's going to be good this year, that year, this year. Never really lived up to his potential. Alexi Protas, I think he's a lock playing on the big team. I do want Connor McMichael to get that long look next season. I don't want him to just be on the team, on the roster in name only and be a healthy scratch. I want him to be in the lineup. Beck Mallenstein, of course, has that big physical presence. I see him slotting in on the fourth line. And Lucas Johansson, hey, I would love for him to be on the Caps next season. It just seems to be one of those players where it's never his time. For Protas and Mallenstein, that moment came in the same game in the best of 5 Atlantic Division semifinals against Charlotte. The Bears opened a 2-1 series lead over the Checkers, dominated early in game 4, opening a 2-0 advantage. Mallenstein had seen enough. The heavy-hitting winger crushed a Checkers defenseman in the corner, dislodging a pane of plexiglass. If you guys didn't see the highlights, take a look at HersheyBears.com. Mallenstein's teammates later credited the big body check as a turning point in the game and perhaps this series. That is what I love about Beck Mallenstein's game. I talked about him probably about a week ago. You'll have to take a look on YouTube or on your podcatcher of choice. They're talking about Beck Mallenstein. I am excited for him to be on this team. Another big physical player. I love those kind of players on the team, kind of the intimidation factor. It is big. I know that this is a league that's getting younger and it's faster and they're kind of moving away from the tough guy. But trust me, there is still a spot for a tough guy, a guy that's saying, you're not pushing around my players. You're not pushing me around. And sometimes I'm just going to fight you to change the momentum. Those guys are still important in the National Hockey League, despite what all the talking heads said that, it's all about skill, and that's important as well. But never, diminish or underestimate the importance of a physical player. And I think Beck Mallenstein has that on lock. So I'm really excited to see him. Also, like I said, Connor McMichael, excited to see what he can do under the tutelage of Spencer Carbery, a guy that already is familiar with Connor McMichael and also probably knows how to make him play very well. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals. And when you're done listening to this show, make sure and head on over to Locked On Nationals, Commanders, or Wizards. Yes, we have you covered for all DC sports. And if you are following the Stanley Cup, well, we got you covered there, as well as there is Locked On NHL 5 days a week on your podcatcher of choice and on YouTube. So make sure and listen to those shows. Are you an everydayer of Locked On Capitals? I would sure love to hear from you. Hit me up on Twitter at DanCaps218 or at Locked On Caps and say, hey, Dan, I'm an everydayer. I'll give you a shout out on Friday's show. So once again, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.